Like washing
Let me
anybody?
deliver it on a no horsepucky level.
Okay.
Okay. First of all, there's a fairly common idea that started, I think, about in the West about 1924, 25, when Gurdjieff first arrived in America. You must understand that Gurdjieff has had a tremendous influence, I know you already know this, tremendous influence on transformational psychology as it's known in the West. At the same time, it must be understood that he was grossly mistranslated and grossly misunderstood by Westerners. The idea that one is asleep must first be divided into two categories. Just as his idea of self-study, you have to define the word self before you can understand what self-study is. I am not a Gurdjieffian. I'm simply stating that the influence of Gurdjieff, which has been very profound, has colored our thought in a certain way that makes it impossible to discuss these ideas until we redefine away from the translations, the Oragian and Bennettian translations of Gurdjieff. Somewhere along the line, Gurdjieff said something like, man is asleep. We must define what we mean. We must redefine these words, sleep and waking. To begin with, there is the machine we call the human biological machine, which is the body with its mind, emotions, its motor, reflexive operation, and so forth. Let's say the human body, and let's include its mind and its emotional states in that. Categorize it as the machine. We'll call it the machine. People don't like to use the word machine necessarily to describe it, but I can show that it is a machine in the sense that it's a reflexive mechanism. Now, let's differentiate the machine from ourselves in the real sense, what we call the essential self. It is not an undefinable something or other. It's a definitely definable thing. It is that part of oneself which is not the machine. Now, suppose that in recent times you referred to those teachers who have said there's an observer, let's say, within us, an observer, a knower, which is not of the body, which is not of the mind, and so forth. Now, how would you differentiate that? I am observing myself walking down the street. Now, is that the observer? Is that the essential self? That is that what is not the machine? Or is that a part of the machine observing the machine? Easily differentiated. If it's the mind observing the machine, it will not interfere. Its observation won't interfere with the machine because it's part of the machine's own ongoing process. But if it's something which is not the machine observing the machine, something will happen to the machine. Something will occur. A change will occur. Because an observer is now in action. It's a very loose application of the Heisenberg principle, which is that the observation of something causes a change in the thing which is being observed. Now, this is the basis for the waking state as well. That the observation of the essential self toward the machine begins to have a definite effect upon the machine. Now, let me back up a moment. It's getting a little confusing, I know, but that's why workshops take 2 days and not 2 minutes. And this is what we'll be dealing with. The essential self, that which is not the machine, is not asleep, nor can it be asleep. It is neither awake nor asleep. The machine, however, is asleep in the sense that we don't like to use the word sleep. It is in the sleeping state, which is to say not the waking state. anyone can tell that the machine is ordinarily in the sleeping state, because everyone has had tastes, glimpses of the waking state from time to time. These are those times in your life when you look back and you think, my God, why do I remember with intimate, precise, exact detail the sights, the smells, the sounds, the taste, every detail of such and such a thing? Why do I remember sitting in my high chair, for instance, and the sunlight gleaming in through the window, and my grandmother stirring oatmeal on the stove, and the radio blaring in the next room, the news is coming over with Alva Liddell, and on and on and on. Why do these things occur? At the times that they occur, that's a mystery that I'm not prepared to discuss at this point. But those are waking state experiences, and everyone has them. Everyone in life, every human being who is alive has had waking state experiences. Those times when you say, my God, I am alive. I am really alive. Everything comes to life. Not only does oneself come to life, but everything around oneself comes to life. And everything around oneself takes on an element of surprise.
Mm-hmm.
This is the waking state. It is obvious when you compare your daily life with that waking state that you spend the majority of the time not in the waking state. It is not the essential self, but the machine which has fallen asleep. Now, if the machine could be brought into the waking state at will, first of all, of what value would that be? And secondly, and more importantly, how could one do such a thing? It's not so important what the advantages are. There are obvious advantages. There are advantages unthought of, advantages you wouldn't even expect for the waking state. Things which can be done with the waking state that are so unexpected and so unknown in ordinary life and so utterly unknown in the sleeping state that they can't even be guessed at. In the sleeping state, you can read or hear or see those things about the waking state which are advantageous, which are wonderful and unexpected and unknown in the sleeping state, and yet not hear them, not see them, not understand them. In the sleeping state, it can't be understood what the waking state is and what its uses are. Now, the waking state of the machine is what Gurdjieff was referring to, but this was mistranslated and misunderstood. He meant that the machine itself can be brought into the waking state by a particular type of action, which is called, in the Sufi tradition, the act of attention, or the power of attention. By turning the attention of the essential self upon the machine is brought naturally and gently into the waking state. And you'll notice that every technique and every method of transformation requires the use of attention upon the machine and expects the machine to enter the waking state. I can translate this for you into a variety of
No, this is really good because
of languages.
I mean, I knew that these things worked, but I didn't understand why.
Okay,
you know.
that's why they work.
Okay.
And everyone has the secret. There is no one individual, no one school that has the secret, and nobody else does. Everyone does. Anyone who tells you that they are the only possessors of this secret, there's something seriously wrong with them. They're making a buck at it. Very realistically, someone like myself can work with 50 to 200 people in a lifetime. And anyone who is really serious about this doesn't go out looking for people. My suggestion to people is, I'm looking for people who are really strongly attracted to working with me. I work with someone for anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, and then out the door. After that, they're on their own. And at this point, there are about 50, maybe 60 people in New York that I'm working with. Realistically, I couldn't possibly work with more than 10 besides that. In other words, that would be the extent of how far I could stretch my attention in order to give everyone full value. I also want to caution, I see this as one of my roles. I caution people against guruitis. I know of very few things, and I know those things extremely well, and I can teach others the same thing. And I know a number of other individuals who can also do the same thing. And I would caution people very carefully to appraise what they throw themselves into and with whom. And the larger the scope, the larger the scale of the school, the more people they try to service, the more suspect I would hold it. And the more money that's involved, the more I would suspect it as well. There are tens of thousands of scams in this world. I can think of any number of better ways to spend one's time and money than these ideas in a large-scale, slick operation.
Mm-hmm.
So, be advised. That's my advice to the lovelorn.
Mm-hmm.
If someone is extremely serious, it ought not to cost them a whole lot of money. Obviously, it takes money to put a workshop on. You've got to rent the building and all this kind of thing. But you should judge it from that. You know, like, how much did it cost to rent this building? And how much did it cost to publicize this? And how much did it cost to actually deliver the workshop, let's say? Or how much did it cost to actually deliver a seminar or a weekend or a week-long thing and so on? And judge according to that. And then how much are they going to take me for from then on?
Mm-hmm.
And I try to stress this point with people. I see and have the teacher for the minimum amount of time necessary, and work doesn't need the money. I promise you.
Mm-hmm.
They don't need it.
Because I thought that was, we can't say prices on the air, but if people are interested, they can call. The flyer, and I realized that it was a 2-day workshop and what the price was. I was really surprised, and having, like I said, seen a lot of flyers, that was a big interest to me. So people who are interested, they can call after the show. They can call here, because I'm going to be here for a while, at 279-0937. And you have a phone number on the flyer. You want to give it?
Yeah, I would. It's 212-223-0792.
Want to say it again?
Sure, it's
I know them out there.
It's 223-0792. And you can get.
And you should say, Paul, that operators are standing by. Come on down right now and get started in the credit world.
How did you? How did you go from an archaeologist to doing this weird stuff?
Okay, you remember you asked for it. In 1959, I was writing science fiction and fantasy. At the same time, I had a couple of clubs in town, jazz clubs in town, which are no longer existing. I brought some jazz music with me, but I don't think we have time to play it. And I worked as a bass player and horn player for a while at the same time. And at the same time, I was fascinated by archaeology and by museumology in general. And I was painting and sculpting and so on. So I had a lot of art background and so on. And I think I hung out every weekend. Had to have been every single weekend, bar none, for at least 2 years, at the Natural History Museum, or at the Met, or at the Spanish Museum, or the Jewish Museum, or later on at the Guggenheim when it got built, and the Museum of Modern Art. I went to every museum I could find in this town. There must be 200. And when I went to California in the early 60s, I had grown up here, I should mention, because my family knew a lot of people. Our apartment, if you ever read Fred Pohl's book, The Way the Future Was, you'll find out what our apartment was like. We had Jackson Pollock and John Cage and Merce Cunningham and Julian Huxley and Bob and Ginny Heinlein, all the science fiction writers as you might expect, Damon Knight and name a science fiction writer, and they were there, and a fantasy writer, they were there, and a mystery writer, they were there. Most of the literary society and the literati and the intelligentsia and so forth flocked into this apartment. We would not uncommonly have 50 people for dinner in Stuyvesant Town, which is hard to live with, you know. And amid all this, there were a number of people who were involved in sculpture, painting, and in archaeology. Okay, I went out to the West Coast, and I started working as an artist, started making my living as an artist. Artist by day and stockbroker, reporter at night, reporting on the market, doing market analyses. And I began to sell my sculpture, particularly. And one day, a guy named Bill Enking, who was an art historian, said, "You are wasting your time. You're a mediocre sculptor. But boy, oh boy, do you know your history. Let me show you something." And he opened up a library of slides on Greco-Roman, Egyptian, on Chinese, started me barreling into Sung and Tang dynasties, and before I knew it, I had an all-consuming interest in archaeology. I had no idea why. It was terrific. I thought it was fantastic. I pursued that for quite some time. And then one thing and another happened, and I ended up working with groups of people in the mid-60s. There were a lot of people on the streets, loose at that time, knocking around wondering what in the hell is happening. And so I started getting involved with groups of people, and little by little the archaeology began to drift. About 10 years ago, I began to see the connection between archaeology and transformational psychology. And so blew right back into it again and began building a museum. At first single-handedly, and then more and more people became involved and became interested in it. And so I've begun to connect archaeology very strongly with transformational psychology. Now, a year ago, in a series of workshops in New York, the people who came to the workshops taught me, as they always do. Every year I learn something from these people. They pay me and come to take the workshop, and I learn. It's fine. Works out well for me. And some people actually learn at the workshop too and accomplish things. One of the things I learned from these good people that I worked with last year is that jewelry in ancient design can be not only a connection between ancient civilizations and the present civilization, but that it also can be a method of work, using the attention. And that is to say, we can use the attention exercises and plug them into building ancient jewelry.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it may seem completely out of place to connect those two things. What has this all got to do with the chronic, personal barrier to the waking state, it says here on this poster? What has it all got to do with that? What does it have to do with a defense mechanism against the waking state? Well, remembering that it's the machine that has the waking state and sleeping state disparities. Working in archaeological context brings the machine into a particular mood. That mood makes it receptive to a particular type of attention, the attention we were talking about earlier. So my abiding interest in archaeology has gone along with everything else that I've been involved with for 25 years. I've worked with groups now for 25 years. Long time.
Are you stopping there? I'm just getting interested.
I don't know. I ran out of gear.
All right, let me ask you. I can always ask questions. I'm real good at that. I bet 8 of them I want to ask.
Go for all 8 and we'll see what happens. I'm not good at answering questions.
Great. Well, I could probably do both if I had to. Why does the machine go into it? Why is the machine sleeping in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
What's the purpose of it?
Okay. Now we'll have to go back a little bit. I'm drawing from, there's a book that we put out, 50 copies. As you can tell, we're not extremely commercial. And I'm drawing from this particular book at this point, in the sense that I'm going to save us about 3 or 4 weeks of discussion by just taking the boiled down essential substances that came out of a lot of work with a lot of groups over the past few years. And we'll have to go back to the reason for the defense mechanism in the first place. Why does the machine leave the waking state and enter into the sleep state? Okay. Imagine yourself at the age of about 5 years. And you're beginning to have to function a little differently than you have up till then. Up till that time as a child, unless you have very bizarre parents, you're allowed to be a kid. You're allowed to have a kind of experience and a kind of approach to life which doesn't require you to function in a very structured way, in a linear, structured fashion. Now at 5 years old or thereabouts, suddenly structure is imposed. When structure is imposed, the natural chaotic state of the machine, which allows the machine to be in the waking state, in the here and now, begins to accept patterning, behavioral patterning, and expectation patterning, if you follow what I'm getting at. It's required to function in a certain way, and it's required to function in a linear way to definite patterns, definite structures, which other people can predict. In other words, you begin functioning in a way predictable to others,
Mm-hmm.
and at the same time, predictable to yourself. This causes the machine to drop into the sleep state, number one, and then to remain in the sleep state, a defense mechanism begins to build from that age on. This defense mechanism prevents the machine from accidentally wandering into the waking state once again. Now, should the machine accidentally wander into the waking state, and should one become unable to return to the sleeping state at will, then at that point the culture takes over and begins to help one re-achieve the sleep state. This can be done in a variety of ways. Chemotherapy is, or I shouldn't say that, chemical therapeutics are one method. Hypnotics, soporifics, and so forth will re-achieve the sleeping state. Very dynamic involvements will re-achieve the sleeping state as well. Sports, for instance. This is an absolute reason for contact sports and for violence in a culture. Violence keeps the machine in the sleeping state. It keeps it on a special kind of alert, which requires that the machine remain in the sleeping state. So there are all kinds of defense mechanisms. There's a cultural defense mechanism against the waking state. The waking state is not appropriate for things like high-speed power tools. It's not really recommended for things like yacht navigation in a bay, which is very crowded, with people coming back into the bay on Sunday afternoon and under motorized power and so on.
But why is that? If you're in the waking state, aren't you supposedly more alert and more aware and more,
Well, no, actually the machine functions better in the sleeping state for what it does in the sleeping state. In other words, for normal everyday functions, it is actually preferable to the machine to be in the sleeping state.
So
the waking state is usable for something else, and it isn't necessary to be in the waking state all the time. It's completely pathological to try to be in the waking state all the time.
It's nice that you told us that.
Well, I mean, there are some people who do remain in the waking state all the time, and they have to be diapered. They've got to be taken care of, and they shall be called gurus. I mean, there's people who actually function in the waking state, like to stay in the waking state, and I consider them, it's my opinion that they are pathological in their decision to remain in the waking state all the time, because they have to be served. I don't know how you feel about it, but I hate to be served. I like to do for myself, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
All right. So if you like to do for yourself, occasionally it's necessary, more than occasionally, it's necessary to drop into the sleeping state. The waking state has one purpose and one purpose only. It's usable, well, I shouldn't say that. It actually has one main purpose, primary purpose, and one secondary purpose, which, without the secondary purpose, the primary purpose would be pretty ridiculous. The primary purpose of the waking state is to produce a transformational effect, which we can talk about if it's another question. I can see another question bubbling right there. Okay, the waking state, and only the waking state of the machine, produces a transformational effect upon the essential self, which is not of the machine. How the waking state of the machine can produce a transformational effect on the essential self, let me leave for a moment. Because the secondary purpose, I should mention also, the secondary purpose of the waking state is to study what we call the work, which is to say, one's life after transformation, post-transformational life. And transformation is not the end all. It's the beginning of one's work. One is able to work post-transformational. So, one can study the work in the waking state, and at the same time, one can prepare for work by using the waking state to produce the transformational effect. And
That is if one can get in and out of the waking state.
if one can get in and out of the waking state at will.
Okay.
And there's a kind of will that we're talking about, not the kind of will that enables you to say, I will that I shall go get an ice cream cone, or I will that I will be successful in business. That's not the will we're talking about. The transformational state, or the transformational effect, the process of transformation, that one is transformed. What some of them call it changed, the changed ones. I like transformation better. It's a little bit more down to earth, a little bit more businesslike. Okay. Transformation is a necessity for work. One cannot work without transformation. One must have been transformed. Transformation is no big deal. I mean, we're not talking about something that is going to prevent you from having to take 90 cents out of your pocket and put it in the little box on a bus. They're still going to ask you for 90 cents after you're transformed. And after you're transformed doesn't mean you're not going to be a turkey anymore. After you're transformed doesn't mean that your teeth aren't going to decay. And transformation doesn't mean that you're going to go into a body type the way you were when you were 18 or 19 years old, and all your hair's going to come back and so forth. I can prove that.
But I also can prove that you don't go back to the body type you were.
That's it. Exactly.
In fact, the last couple of months I was thinking, maybe the sleeping the way I was before was not so bad.
Yeah.
As somebody recently said, so a teacher said that he noticed that very often men who had gone through transformation would lose weight, and women who became awakened would gain. And I said, so what is it good for? I want to gain weight. I would go back to where I was before. To digress for just a minute. Go ahead, I'm sure.
But what is it good for? That's a good point.
There's no choice.
Right, okay. Well, that's what I was kind of getting at when I was talking about gurus and money and so forth also, which is that people who want to do this as a lark, as a weekend lark, shouldn't. They really ought not to. I strongly recommend against transformation. It isn't a fun thing. It's not something that's enjoyable. And it's not something that everyone should do. If you feel called to it, drawn to it, if you must, then you must. It's a kind of work, and you should approach it in the same way, that it's a kind of work. It's just something that some people do, and they feel a necessity for doing that. So if you feel drawn to the work, whatever it is, and of course I've left that completely open to question what the work is, but if you feel drawn to it, you must be in the work. You must be transformed. If you must be transformed, then you must learn the method of bringing the machine into the waking state. And so one thing follows another, but these things are not recommended. I mean, if your idea, for instance, not your idea, if one's idea is, this is going to be a fun thing to do, then I recommend EST. Because EST is fun, it's usable, you can go into business with it, you can do everything from feel better about yourself to power trip over the world with it. It's a fantastic set of tools for someone who wants to have fun with themselves and fun with their environment. Terrific. I recommend it for that. This work that we are presenting is not for everyone. It isn't fun. It isn't for oneself. And one should only enter it if one feels compelled to, but not in a compulsive way. Compelled in another way. Let's say a gentle inner persuasion that one must do this. Not attraction, not compulsion. I gotta do it. Why? Because if I don't, who will? I like that particular answer. If I don't, who will? That to me is a good reason to be there.
Okay. I don't know why. Would you be open to taking some phone calls?
Sure.
Answering some questions? I usually people are open to it, but you never can tell. I should have asked you before, but you weren't here on time. I'm going to put us in delay. So that's what's going on now.
Okay.
Because I have these people who like to
Yes, I know.
have their little time to be on the radio. The number here is 279-3400. So you explain, or it's explained on the brochure, the chronic.
Which it's a name that we call the defense mechanism against the waking state, which began to develop at the age of about 5,
Mm-hmm.
and forms a barrier. It produces a barrier, which is a cumulative barrier that builds and builds and builds. For instance, anger, in a lot of different expressions, can be a chronic, a defense mechanism against the waking state. Now, there are a variety of different chronics. Depending upon which chronic has built up or which defense mechanism has built up, we call each of those a typicality or a type. Now, the typicality can form a thread. Let's take anger as an example. As the machine approaches the waking state, anger will build and build and build. In order to prevent the waking state from occurring, the anger will build to a fever pitch and then to an explosion, to a cathartic point. Catharsis is the ultimate defense mechanism against the waking state. And so you'll find most of the pop teachings to be cathartic, which is to say, passing through catharsis or passing through some form of personal crisis, leading immediately into a state of calm,
Mm-hmm.
which is the farthest possible distance from the waking state. Now, there's only 2 reasons for the defense mechanism, the chronic, to not be active. That is to say, for the machine to not fight against the waking state. In one case, it's because the waking state has already been achieved. No sense locking the barn door once the horse is out. Once the machine is in the waking state, like a kid in a bath, hey, this is terrific. I love it. Why don't I come here more often? But the other is that the machine is the farthest possible from the waking state. So again, there's no reason to fight. There's nothing to fight against. It's far away. So it's either far away or already there.
Okay.
Otherwise, the defense mechanism is active. So
it's most active when it's almost there?
Most active nearest the waking state.
Damn.
Really. If one could prevent the cathartic reaction, the waking state would be achieved. And there are methods of doing this, of making someone more and more excited, using irritation and exhaustion techniques and so forth. You've heard about all this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't happen to do that. I have other methods. But there are irritation exhaustion methods. I've used them. I used them in the late 60s, early 70s. And brought whole communities into complete mayhem. They were ready to lynch me. And I had people going around gnawing at their bones, more or less, to bring them into this near cathartic state. And then all it was a question of was preventing the catharsis from occurring, preventing the blow-off. If we could prevent the blow-off, we had it knocked. Within minutes, they'd be in the waking state.
So what happens? It actually almost blows up inside.
Almost.
Uh-huh.
But then it's just like turning a machine on that's, let's say turning on a motor that's slightly out of round, slightly eccentric. And it gets wilder and wilder and more wobbly. And then at the very last minute, just before it explodes, you very calmly reach over and turn the switch off. And it just comes to a complete halt.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, the waking state is entered. Now, that's a very dangerous technique. I don't happen to like it. I've used it for 2 years. Found it to be very dangerous. We had a lot of casualties from it. And I switched over to another very gentle method called the wind and water method, which I've used since 1972. Terrific method. A gentle wearing away process, kind of like nagging.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, you're nagging the machine awake.
This is WBAI in New York. WBAI, you're on the air?
Hello, Mary.
Hi.
I've been listening. This has been a fascinating discussion over the past hour. But I was wondering, one question has come to mind, and Mr. Gold has alluded to something called the work. And I don't quite understand what he means. This is something that is supposed to be a follow-up to transformation. Did he go into explaining a little bit about what it is?
Did you get all that?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Well, what the work is, I think that question is asked to me more often than any other question. First of all, I have to tell you what it is to be a science fiction writer, by way of answer. Is that okay if I do that?
Certainly.
Okay. As a science fiction writer, I go to a lot of science fiction conventions. Not a lot. 4 or 5 a year. And in the course of that, either I will be approached or any writer I've ever met will be approached by a fan and asked, where do you get your ideas? Now, as it happens, I was just up at Rhinebeck, which is a craft festival upstate, and I was talking with a sculptor who happened to be, I consider, a very, very brilliant sculptor. And somebody walked up to him and said, hey, this is great stuff. Where do you get your ideas? And the sculptor answered the same way that I've ever heard any writer answer. I steal them, I find them, I borrow them, they just come. I don't know. It's what I do with the ideas that counts. Now, that by way of explaining to you, this is not an unanswerable question. But if you're really serious about this question, you're going to have to more or less agree that the answer will come over a period of years, not in one Princetonian verbalization. So what I will recommend to you is this. The work can be studied only in the waking state. It can only be seen in the waking state and understood in the waking state. It can't necessarily be understood in the waking state, but that is the only place it can be understood. In other words, the waking state doesn't guarantee understanding.
Yes.
But the work is absolutely invisible. Now, there's a parable about the blind men and the elephant. Okay? I have no idea whether you are or have been, whether you are now or ever have been in the waking state. Now, am I asking that? What I'm saying is that in the sleeping state, now it's not, again, it's not you that's in the sleeping state, but the machine. In the sleeping state, the work is utterly unknown. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't feel it, you can't taste it, you can't touch it. There is no way that you can detect the work, even if it's right in front of you. But in the waking state, you can. So I strongly recommend that if you're really serious about it, pursue the waking state any way that you feel you should. I don't recommend any particular way to do this. It's up to you to find your way of pursuing the waking state. If you're serious about this question, then pursue it. Find out what the work is. But the only way you'll find out is by looking at the work from the view of the waking state. Do you understand?
Maybe to an extent.
Okay.
To you speak, I've been reminded a great deal of some of the methods and concepts in Zen Buddhism. I wonder if there are any conscious connections here.
Well, you mean between my work and Zen Buddhism?
Right.
My friend Zalman Schachter, I don't know if you know who he is, Reb Zalman Schachter, calls himself a Hasidic Buddhist, or one of the Zen Hasidim. No, there isn't. there isn't really a profound connection. Sure, I can draw parallels between my work and Zen Buddhism, but I can also draw parallels between my work and the work of H.P. Lovecraft. So.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank
Sure.
you. I have to ask you a question, and now we have a switchboard filled with calls. I have no idea whether I've ever been in a waking state or a sleeping. I know I've been in states. You know, I don't know what to name them.
That's actually a lot more than most. Most people are unaware that they are in states.